Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I am fighting a summer fever, so you have to excuse me if I'm not on par today. And last night was Obon, which is our biggest celebration during the year. It's just like the Day of the Dead, so we remember our ancestors and we have party and music, and so it was a late night as well last night. But nonetheless, I am honored and happy to be here in your church. And when I heard of the opportunity, I didn't know there was a youth church in Pottsville. Well, it was associated at one point in time with the Unitarian Church in Bethlehem. I was part of the Unitarian Buddhist Association through James Ford, Ishmael Ford. So I am familiar with the Unitarian Church, and when that kind of dissolved and leadership changed in Bethlehem, we kind of went out on our own and became what is now Blue Mountain Zendo. For those of you that don't know, Zen literally means meditation. So when you say that you're a Zen Buddhist, it's kind of a misnomer, because we're not all Buddhist. There are Jews, there's Christians, there's atheists, it's very much similar to the Unitarian faith in that there really is no prerequisites of belief. There's just kind of a commonality or a community that gathers together. So we do, some people say, have enough substance to be a religion, and other people say that we're really a philosophy. Because there is no prerequisites of belief, and there is no idea of really a God or a deity. That's a personal choice. So it's kind of really interesting, and we kind of fall between, the idea of both a philosophy or a way of life and a religion. But with that being said, we are a Rinzai tradition. Rinzai is the tradition of the samurai. So when Zen or meditation came from India, which was called Dhyana, to China, which it became Chan, and then it went to Vietnam, which became Tien, and then Korea, Sun, and then lastly to Japan. And it was the Japanese that really refined it. To be honest with you, Zen was not very popular at all in India. Buddhism wasn't even really popular in India, which a lot of people don't know. It's true, it didn't last very long there at all. China is really what made Buddhism very popular and brought it kind of to the commoner, and with the message that basically all people were equal. So that was something in a Confucius system which was unheard of. All people are equal. It's not about relationships, but it's about equality. So it kind of mixed with Taoism in China and became what we know as Zen now. So as it goes through Asia and ends up in Japan, the Rinzai Zen tends to be very disciplined. It was an ascetic practice. The Buddha was an ascetic monk. So he lived in the jungle. He only drank what he could get on the leaves and the forest floor in the morning. He only ate vegetation that was already dead. So severe austerities, a severe life. So at some point in time, though, the Buddha kind of said, well, I'm really weak. My body is really beat up, and I don't feel spiritually grounded at all, so this is not the way. So he kind of did away with the severe austerities. He did away with the ascetic discipline, as severe as it was. But it still kind of kept that element. And when it came into Japan, well, the samurai are very disciplined, the military order. So you have this tradition that's based in discipline. And based in the exploration of the moment as a completion. So you can think for a soldier, you don't know moment by moment if you're going to be alive or dead. So being in every single moment completely was something that fit really in the samurai way of life. And again, this is kind of the merger in Japan. Buddhism itself, of course, is very passive. We believe in ahisma, or no harm, right? But just like any culture, it kind of becomes absorbed by various subgroups. And the samurai kind of really gravitated towards kind of the scholastic practice of Buddhism, which is Rinzai, compared to something called Soto, which was the commoner's type of Chan Buddhism or meditation. So the tradition is very, very old, was the tradition of the samurai. Came to the US basically in the late 1800s, but really wasn't that popular until the 50s and 60s. During the whole spiritual revolution, people started to look in Asian cultures and a lot of things were brought back. So Zen Buddhism has really been kind of culminating in the United States probably for about 40 years now, so it's relatively young. And it's moving away from Japanese Rinzai Zen to American Rinzai Zen. So it's going through this change. It's becoming Americanized. The cultural elements are kind of being cleaned out and replaced with American culture. So it's in this great evolution, and in some way it's actually becoming Christianized. Because every single culture that we kind of call Zen Buddhism kind of the tofu of religion. Because any culture that it finds itself in, it kind of absorbs the flavor of the culture, right? And that's pretty much with any kind of religion or belief. So this is pretty much a Christian country with Christian values. So the idea of the Bodhisattva, or the idea of practicing not for oneself but for others, is really being brought to the forefront because that was Jesus' message. Right, and sacrifice for others. So it's kind of wonderful the way that it's blossoming and the way that it's kind of evolving into something beautiful, which I probably won't see in my generation, but maybe in another 2 or 3 generations it will become American Zen. The monastery that I trained at was Daibusatsu Zendo in Catskills in upstate New York. It was the first Rinzai Zen monastery in the United States. It's one of 2 of the largest in the United States. I trained with Edo Shimano Roshi, who was a Japanese Roshi from Ryutakushi in Japan. So it was very traditional in the way that I was trained. We were up at 4 o'clock in the morning and we sat still and motionless till 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And then plus we had work in between all of that. So very, very tough lifestyle. Still ascetic in its own way, and not a lot of sleep, not a lot of food, just enough to get by. But there's a reason for that. There really is a reason for that. And that is that we really kind of become stagnant and stationary a lot of times. And it takes something drastic many times to kind of open us up, to give us new horizons and perspectives. And sometimes we become so kind of attached and enclosed in that we can't see anything other than what we want to see. So sometimes it takes something kind of severe to open our eyes. And that is, again, that Zen perspective of using discipline in order to open oneself up so one can express themselves freely and openly, fully in the moment. So with that being said, I was thinking about, well, what kind of sermon should I give? And most of the time, it's a little bit about Buddhism and where Buddhism came from and all of that. But that's stuff you really can read in a book. I mean, there's so many books out there, countless. And you go into any bookstore and there's like rows and rows and rows of Buddhist commentary. So that you can kind of get on your own. Something that you probably may have vaguely heard of, but probably have never encountered, is something called a koan. Has anybody ever heard of a koan before? Okay, so a koan is a mondo, or an interaction, a historical one, between a teacher and a student, in which the student realized some spiritual truth. So the way that my tradition works, and what makes Rinzai unique, is that we use these koans, or these books or batteries of koans. And my teacher has gone through these koans and answered them with his teacher. I've gone through them with my teacher. My students go through. So some of these are thousands of years old, dating back to Makakasha, which was one of the first students of the Buddha. And we know that they work because here I am. So the answers and kind of the environment and the culture, the way that they're described, of course, is different because we're all unique. We all have unique experiences at different times. But yet, kind of the root of the core expression is always the same. They say it time and time and time again. And if you see it and gone through it yourself, you can say, yeah, that's it. So that's kind of the way that my tradition works. There's something called transmission. And transmission is basically transmitting these truths or these hidden truths to students that pass them down to their students and on and on and on and on. So lineage is something that's very important in my tradition and upholding lineage. People say that there's no answers, true answers to koans. There is true answers to koans. So whoever says that, it's incorrect. Again, the description may be a little bit different person to person, but there are definite answers, or why even have them if there's no answers? They're not really riddles. What they are is they are constructs that help you to dismantle your fixed way of perceiving something, right? So many times we think we know, we think we know, we think we know, but if we sit with what we think we know for long enough, we realize that we really don't know. And then we're kind of open up to new horizons. Well, now what? What is the truth? And we begin to see. So these kind of create cracks in our psyche that we have to investigate. And each one of them points to a different aspect of the awakened mind. What's the awakened mind, right? Great question. And when I figure it out, I'll tell you. But the idea of the awakened mind is the Christ consciousness, God itself, whatever you want to call it really is irrelevant. All of you know exactly what I'm talking about, or you wouldn't be here today, right? So these are ways of exploring something that's ineffable, something that cannot be described, right? It's kind of creating a shortcut and using a spiritual speak to describe it, right? So if we can't really describe the whole because it's complete in itself, maybe we can kind of break it apart in little pieces that we can digest. And the more details or pieces that you acquire or understand, the greater your insight into that complete picture or experience of what Jesus is or what God is or whatever you call it. So that's the idea behind the koan. So I thought that here in koan, and that's pretty much what we do. You see all the Zen monks are always, in zazen like this, and it looks like they're just kind of dreaming or something. And really what we're doing is inside, we're trying to answer this koan because we have to go to our teacher soon and sit in front of our teacher and say, this is what I've got so far in meditation. And he'll either say, yes or more, or encourage us, or pass us and say next up. So we go, okay, next. There's 3 of these books. So, and after all 3 of these books, she gets some neat new title called Roshi, right? So this is the koan that I've chosen for today. It's case 35, and it's based on a Chinese ghost tale, believe it or not. Very, very famous story. It's called Zendo and Her Soul Are Separated. Koan. Goso asked a monk, Zendo and her soul are separated. Which is the true one? Mumon's commentary. Now Mumon, he's a rascal in the Zen lineage. Very, very sharp as a tack. And very, very insightful. So what he did is he kind of took all of these koans, put them together, and added some great commentary to help us along. Some pointers, right? Because you can't give somebody, even if I would give you the answer for this koan, it wouldn't make a difference. Because unless you experienced it and truly knew it with your heart, there'd be no use. You could kind of utter what the answer is, but I'd know. Because I'd go through the experience of it. So, Muon's commentary is, if you are enlightened in the truth of this koan, you will then know that coming out of one husk and getting into another is like a traveler putting up in hotels. In case you are not yet enlightened, do not rush around blindly. When suddenly earth, water, and fire, and air are decomposed, you will be like a crab boiling in a pot, struggling with its 7 arms and 8 legs. Do not say then that I have not warned you. Mumon's poem. Ever the same, the moon among the clouds, different from each other, the mountain and the valley, how wonderful, how blessed is this one or two. Bell 3 times. Okay, so Muon gives us this great visualization, right? So it's like taking off one husk and getting to another. I saw this show I was watching with my son. It was about hermit crabs, really neat things. They kind of go around and they take things that are not really them, and they crawl into them, and then all of a sudden they make them theirs. But they're never really theirs, but they walk around and go throughout their life with something that's not them, that they consider who they are, right? And it's very much how we are with our personas. We step in one and we take one off, we step into another, on and on and on. How many personas do we go through in a day? Or how many titles or positions do we go through in a day? Mom? Are we dad? Are we employer? Are we employed? Are we wife? Are we husband, son, daughter? All of these are husks. All of these are personas that we step in and out of, right? Sometimes we have to be, mom or dad, and sometimes we have to be son or daughter. And we step in and out of these so easily. And at some point in time when we ask that great question, who am I? How do we answer that? Which one of these personas, which one of these husks is the true one? So from a Zen perspective, we begin exploring, exactly who am I? And it's a great question, because we call it a Genjo koan, because it's a koan in itself that's naturally created. We all create this koan. We all say, who am I, at one point in time? And we think about it, who am I? And it's usually at some crisis, right? Because it always takes some kind of crack in the armor, right? It takes something to rattle us, to look at ourselves and says, well, who am I? Which way is up, which way is down, which way is north, which way is south? Don't know. And at those point in times is really when we begin to investigate that question of who am I? So to understand Senjo and her soul, let me actually read to you the Chinese tale, and I give you a better understanding. Right? So the story of Senjo and her soul are separated. It's taken from the Tang Dynasty legend in Koshu in China, and a dynasty that lived a man named Chokan. He had two daughters, but as the elder one died young, he loved the younger daughter Senjo all the more and made much of her. Remember, sons and daughters at this time in China are very important, because as Confucian role, so everything is about relationships. Since she was an unusually beautiful girl, many young men wished to marry her. Now Sen's father selected a good youth named Hinro from her many suitors and decided to give Senjo to him, which was tradition at the time. Senjo, however, had a secret lover named Ocho, who was Chokan's nephew. When Ochu was a child, Sen's father had told him in jest, Ochu and Senjo will make a well-matched couple. The two had better get married when you grow up, he said. This remark made them believe that they were engaged. And in the course of time, they found out that they really loved each other deeply. Senjo, who had suddenly been told by her father to marry Hinro, was greatly cast down and depressed. She loved someone else. As for Ochu, when he heard of it, he was so distressed that he decided he had to leave the village. He just couldn't stand to look at her. It just hurt too much. So one evening, he secretly left his homeland by boat without even telling Senjo, just kind of snuck out of town. At midnight, he noticed a vague figure running along the bank as if it was following his boat. He stopped to see who it was, and to his great surprise, it was Senjo, his love. He was overcome with joy at the truth of her heart, and they embraced each other in tears. As they could not dare to return to Senjo's father, they traveled to a remote country of Shoku, where they were married. So at that time, you just didn't go against your parents. They had to leave. 5 years had passed after they left home. Senjo, who was now the mother of 2 children, could not forget her native country or her longing for her parents and her longing for her home increased day by day. One day in tears, she confessed her painful longing to her husband. Loving you and following you, I left my home without permission. I have stayed with you in this remote village. I wonder how my parents are getting on. Having left home as I did against my parents' wishes, an ungrateful daughter like myself may never be able to return home. Osho was in fact also longing for his homeland. He calmed her by saying, "Let us go back, Koshu, and beg your parents' pardon." Immediately, they hired a boat and returned to Koshu, their dear old home. Leaving Zendo at the port, Osho first went to Chokan's house by himself, apologized for his ungrateful act, and told him the whole story. Chokan was astonished and asked, "Well, what girl are you talking about?" "Your daughter Zendo," the father replied. Choku said, My daughter Sen? From the time you left Koshu, she's been sick and in bed, but she's been unable to speak." Osho was equally taken back and tried to explain. "Zendo certainly followed me. We've been living in the countryside together, and we have 2 children now." In his house, and sure enough, his daughter Sen was there sick in bed as well. In bewilderment, Chokan told the sick Zendo the whole story, whereupon, looking extremely delighted, she got out of bed without saying a word. In the meantime, the Zendo who had come ashore arrived at Chokan's house in a cart. The sick Zendo went out from her home to meet her, and just as Zendo from the boat alighted from the cart, the 2 Zendos became one. Master Goso was an academic. There's 2 different kinds of monks. There's an academic monk and there's a monastic monk, just like in any other religion. He was an academic. So he really didn't have a great deal of experience with the philosophy that he taught. So there was kind of a disconnect there. Upon realizing that and investigating a more experiential form of Zen, he kind of found that balance between philosophy and the actual experience of what he was trying to describe in his philosophy or theology. When we hear things of this story of 2 become one, we have to ask ourselves, what common root allows unification, right? Just like when we were talking about before with different husks, right? How can it be that we can take off and put on so many husks without getting lost, without drifting away? There must be something cohesive at the core there that keeps all of these husks together, right? Or something that inhabits these husks. In the story of Zendo and her soul, at the end it says that the 2 become one, right? So we have Zendo, who is the lover, right? Who is in love with this boy, but cannot marry him traditionally because she was promised to somebody else. And then we have the grateful daughter, that has responsibilities in the family. And was the only daughter that was left, and should be taking care of traditionally, the home and the parents and the children. So she's torn between these 2 husks, right? Between these 2 personas. Well, which one is the real Zendo? And I ask that same question to you. I mean, if I were to ask you, who are you? What's the first thing that pops to mind?
I'm me.
Me, right? Okay. That works, so I'm me. And a lot of times when we ask that same question, how do we answer it? We usually, our occupation, who are you? Or where we live, or our background. It's interesting that you said me, right? Because it's actually very rare that somebody says that. And one of the reasons why you were able to do that is because there wasn't a lot of thought to it. You reacted. right? When we start getting into intellect and thought and dichotomies and duality takes over, all of a sudden we get really confused. And then we can't answer that question. Then all of a sudden we start going down the laundry list, trying to figure out exactly which one of these things we are. And there's another koan that kind of is an adjunct to this, which is who is he or who is she? And it points to that. And sometimes it takes people years to answer that very simple question that any 5-year-old would answer like that. But we become so lost in our husks that we no longer remember who we are, right? Which one am I? We feel torn. Who am I? One minute I'm the boss, the next minute I'm the husband or the wife, and sometimes it's hard to juggle them all. How do we do it, right? How do we do it? This koan points to a very deep truth of unity. And what it points to is something that is beyond duality itself, something that is beyond the husks themselves, the persona themselves. It's pointing to something that is direct, at the core of all things. And I had talked about a little before about Goso, who is the monk in this. And the reason why I pointed out to him being an academic and then looking for a more experiential practice is because that in order to really get to the heart and know, you have to do the work yourself. You have to root through the husks yourself. Nobody can tell you, nobody can give it to you. It must be your own work. They say that, the reborn again Christians say that you must have a personal relationship with Christ. And I probably agree. You must have a personal relationship with your spirituality, with your beliefs. You must know it. It must be yours. Somebody cannot give you faith. The faith must be yours. There's two main kind of selves, and this is kind of Buddhist philosophy, or Buddhist psychology. There's almost every single Buddhist monk that I know is also a psychoanalyst, so the two like go hand in hand. You wouldn't believe, right? So, you have this ego self that's all about basically gratification. What's in it for me? How do I meet my needs, right? And that's the one that's kind of running after this and that. I want the new car, I want the better job, I want more money, I want this and that and that, right? So we're just constantly kind of like chasing that carrot. If you ever see the cartoon of the carrot dangling in front of the horse, and it's galloping, but it never will get it. And these material things promise us that. They tease us. But, when we get them, inevitably we feel deceived. We feel empty. And then we're like, okay, well, the TV says that if I get this, then I'll be happy, and we're off again. So we have all of these goals. We go through all of these goals that have nothing really of substance in the end at all. And going through that, it can be easily seen why we don't know who we are. Because if we're not really focusing on ourselves, and if we're really not focusing on our true self, but kind of just running after things in the exterior, looking for something outside of ourselves to bring us peace and happiness, we can see why we become disenfranchised and why we feel lonely and disconnected. So there's a part of ourselves that knows this is not the way, right? And it gets very lonely, and it feels separated, and it feels isolated, right? And anybody ever felt that way? Just like lost? Like, look at your life. I feel that way. Look at my life, and you're like, well, what's going on? Where am I going? Why do I feel this way? Something's missing. What is it? What is it? Right? And usually it's that core part of yourself, that true self, that soul, that essence, that's trying to get your attention and saying, you've been distracted, you're running after the wrong things. And I call the Dharma talk a backward step because that's really what Zen is asking you to do, to take a backward step. Instead of running after that carrot after that new thing with all promise to stop and take a step back from that. I was on the radio at Moravian, and Channel 69 was there, and she was asking what I thought would help to remedy the situation between Israel and Palestine. And I said, just do nothing. And she looks at me, she's like, okay, let's try that again. What do you think? And I'm like, she's like, what do you think? And I'm like, do nothing. And she looked at me again, and I think at that point in time she just gave up. But she missed it. That's that backward step. Let's take a backward step from all of these things that we hold so tightly to. All of these beliefs, all of these attachments, all of these thoughts and perspectives. Take a step back from them for a minute and look at one another through the eyes of the soul, or through the eyes of the true self. Through that thing that, through all of the changes in husk and persona, still remains constant. It is the core from which all these things emanate from. Now, I'm not saying that all of these personas and husks are not you, because of course we're all mothers and fathers and sons and daughters and all of these things. Of course these things are also you, right? But we have to remember in perspective that these things are you, but they're not all of you. They're just parts of you. So watching that we don't get lost in one, consumed by one, forgetting all others, including the big one, which is the one, our spiritual self, our core self, the one that's not about me, but about us. Listening to that one, sometimes that's so hard, because the noise of the ego is so deafening sometimes that we can't hear that very subtle voice that speaks from within us that says, this is not the way. You're missing something. Take a step back and look within and see what it is. Our Dharma talks are usually, our sermons are an hour. So she said, 20 minutes. I'm like, 30? She's like, okay. So I have like 3 minutes. So the Zen tradition really is so utterly simple. It could be summed up as a backward step. For once, doing nothing. Now, everybody hears that. So, oh, goodness, doing nothing, you can't do that. Can't do that. That's lazy or this. And the thing is it's not. Taking that stepward back is hard to do. To shut everything off and to truly listen with everything is so difficult to do. Right? And we catch ourselves kind of doing it throughout the day. Maybe we take a moment or something at work when something's stressful and we just go, or I just need a minute. Just step out the door, I need to get away. That is that part of us saying, you're getting carried away. Just take a moment for yourself and settle and center yourself. Right? And we take that backward step, right? A lot of times because we're forced to. Life forces us to, whether we like it or not. In Zen, we say to just sit. People say, well, what is the truth of Buddhism? And all, we have all these sutras and all the robes and the colors and all that. And it's like, not about that. It had nothing to do with that. My teacher likes to say that the robes are like a peacock. So the robes attract the students, but then they figure out, that it's really not about the robes, hopefully, in the end, and the titles and all of that. But it attracts them. So he says we're like peacocks, all the fancy robes and stuff like that. But it literally is just so simple. It's just to be present in the moment completely with that true self, or with that soul, or with that essence, fully present and rooted and heard. Right? We call it thundering silence. And we all have experienced it all throughout our lives. We just haven't recognized it. Taking a walk through the woods, a run, a bike, the birth of a child, at a funeral. We've all had those moments where everything went away and there just was this wonderful, wonderful silence. There was no I or me. There was no separation anymore. There just was the moment complete. And that is what Zen is all about. Everything else is, is just kind of entertainment, directions, fingers pointing at the moon, but not the moon itself. So we all can be Zen students and Unitarians or Christians or whatever. It simply means to pray or to meditate and to make time in your life, to make it a priority in your life, even if it's 5 or 10 minutes a day, just to sit and center, just to breathe and just be present with yourself. And you'll find that when you go off to work after, everybody's like, well, how can you do that? You go off to work and multitask. The wonderful thing is if you do that on a regular basis as a habit, you'll be surprised at how much more effective you'll be. Because you'll think clearly, you won't be as stressed out, and you'll be more productive because you're more present and not distracted. So thank you very much for having me. It was an honor to be at your church, and what a wonderful congregation that you have here. Thank you.